The search for New York's top judge continues as the Senate votes no on the governor's controversial nomination again. We'll break down the full story and how we got here, what will happen next. Hi everybody, welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. The legal fight goes on. That's what Senate Republicans are saying after they got the floor vote they were seeking with a lawsuit on whether to confirm Hector LaSalle as the state's chief judge. Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine has more.
Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins says after major recent Supreme Court decisions such as Dobbs versus Jackson, which overturned the constitutional right to abortion, more people have been paying attention to the judicial branch of government, even on a state level.
So it was not inappropriate for us, with the eyes of the nation and the eyes of the state on us, to look for a nominee that was able to lead the court in this really, really critical time.
Her remarks on Wednesday came after a floor vote took place in the Senate, which for the second time rejected Justice Hector LaSalle's nomination for the top judge position in the state.
Ayes 20, nays 39.
The nomination fails.
The floor vote happening after a lawsuit was filed by Senate Republican Anthony Palumbo, who claimed the nomination should have gone on to the floor to be voted by all senators, not just the ones on the Senate Judiciary Committee. His Republican colleagues also interpret the state constitution that way.
This is a judicial nomination, not a bill. That vote always should have come to the floor, and it didn't.
Senator Palumbo says just because it did end up going to a floor vote on Wednesday doesn't mean that his lawsuit is going away.
We kind of thought something like this might happen along the way, so we're prepared for it and we're ready to go forward.
Republicans say this lawsuit is about principle and that millions of New York voices are not being heard because their representatives are not having the opportunity to vote on the floor for this important issue. While a document was filed Wednesday on behalf of Senate Democrats requesting the court to dismiss the action as moot, the Senate GOP tells me this case will move forward in court on Friday.
Joined now by Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine to give us additional details here on the LaSalle vote, as well as a little bit of the timeline, how this all broke down. Jamie, nice to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming in. So this was kind of a debacle, right?
Yes, to say the least.
So goes up for the nomination. The governor had a bunch of people in her own party that didn't even want to push this guy through. How did we get to this point?
So first of all, there's an open vacancy for the top judge position in New York State, and that's in the Court of Appeals. So Governor Hochul made her choice. She nominated Judge Hector LaSalle, and from there it went on to a committee hearing. Now, during this committee hearing, it was 5 hours, and lawmakers got to ask LaSalle questions about what he believes in, how he came up with rulings previously. So it was a really long process, and ultimately what they decided was, even though, like LaSalle said, look, I'm a Democrat, right, I believe in a woman's right to choose, some Democrats were saying, look, he's too conservative based on some of his prior rulings, and even the fact that he ran on a conservative line at one point in time.
So it gets shot down. Then the Republicans came forward and said, wait a minute, this needs to go to the full Senate, not just the Judiciary Committee should be voting on this nomination.
Right, and a lawsuit was filed by Senator Palumbo, and he said, look, we should all be voting on this. It's such a big issue that every senator should have their voices heard because they represent the people, and this is something that just shouldn't be shot down in committee.
It's still ongoing. They got the full floor vote.
They did, yes.
And it was still a no.
Right. And that was expected. Democrats were saying all along, it's not going to go forward. So we might as well just should have left it in committee and so on and so forth. But because of the lawsuit, I think they saw that as a potential distraction. And you got to remember, we're in budget season now.
Sure.
So they're very focused on that, and they're saying, we just want to get this done and over with. If we do that, then hopefully the courts will decide that this is moot and we can move forward.
And the whole idea of the Republicans bringing the suit in the first place was their interpretation of the state's constitution.
Right.
The way I understand it is that they feel this is how it should have been done before the full Senate, like you said.
Yes, and it really boils down to the issue of constitutionality. And Democrats are interpreting it in one way and Republicans are interpreting it in another. The Democrats are saying, look, we are our own branch of government, we make our own rules, and therefore we abided by them. So that should be that. And then the Republicans are like, no, we can't do this because every senator was elected by the people. So their voices should be heard, and the millions of New Yorkers that they represent, their voices shouldn't be silenced either.
And what is kind of the grumblings, if you will, behind the scenes there in the halls of the Capitol? Are you hearing any names of other judges that either the Republicans or the Democrats would like to see come forward?
Right now, people are staying pretty tight-lipped about it. So we don't know when the governor is going to choose her next nominee. That's all up in the air at this point. But as soon as we learn more information, we will be sure to report it.
And it's dragging on. And as you said, we are in the middle of budget negotiations. So this is kind of the last thing they want to be focusing on when they're trying to work on that.
Exactly.
All right. Jamie DeLine, Capitol correspondent, thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you. All right. College students are calling for greater investment from the state. When we return, we're going to hear from the head of the nation's largest higher education union about the programs they'd like to see more funding for within the SUNY system. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. SUNY students from across the state made their way to the state capitol here in Albany to advocate for more SUNY funding. Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine caught up with them and shares what they would like to see that money go towards.
At the $1 Million Staircase, members of the SUNY Student Assembly called on lawmakers to further support higher education.
We're just here to advocate for all the students in our system to make sure everyone has a fair, equitable education and has all the resources they need to get just that.
The students would like to see increased funding for tuition assistance, known as TAP.
So we're looking to increase the eligibility for TAP to $125,000. Right now it's been stagnant at $80,000 since 2001, and with inflation and increased cost of living, this is imperative to us.
But that's not all they're calling for.
We are advocating for increase in mental health funding, increase in support for students with disabilities, and also support for the No Hunger Campus Act, where we can help alleviate food insecurity across our campuses.
Students with disabilities in higher education only receive about $2 million, so that would bring them up to $15 million, which would really support them in all their ventures.
The governor's proposed budget allocates $176 million for SUNY schools, with $32 million going towards increasing financial aid to help cover tuition costs of New York residents. The governor has also proposed $1.5 billion for capital projects at SUNY and CUNY schools. Reporting in Albany, I'm Jamie DeLine.
We're pleased now to be joined by Fred Kowal, the president of United University Professions, to give his take on the state education spending plans. Fred, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So first of all, let me get your first impression of the budget presentation given by Governor Hochul.
Well, first, we're very thankful that for the second year in a row, the governor has increased her proposed funding for SUNY. I think it's very important. Last year, she started with some improvement. This year, there is some increase in some areas that we welcome, certainly. Unfortunately, two facts. One is there is nothing in the budget that will address the crisis facing SUNY's hospitals and also the 19 campuses that are facing severe financial crises. We need to remember that as helpful as the governor's budget was that last year, and how this year, if passed with some additional funding, would be another help, the reality is we are trying to dig out from a massive hit financially going back to the Great Recession of 2008, and then the terrible cuts that took place under Governor Cuomo. If we simply had a budget that included the resources where we were in 2008, controlling for inflation, SUNY would have basically $7 billion more to spend on the education and training of those who are the next generation of healthcare workers, teachers, and those who will fill the jobs and work in the communities in which we live. There's a lot of work to do. The governor has started us down the road, but much, much more financial support is needed.
So your contention is that those 19 campuses, a multitude of factors reaching this deficit now, about $160 million, as you said.
Yes, yeah, and I think first and foremost we have to understand the reality that under Governor Cuomo, there was a conscious attempt to cut the public sector, specifically in public higher education. That's the only way you can look at this. And the devastation was deep-seated. And then when you throw in COVID and the impact that it had on enrollment and revenues coming to the campuses, you have a perfect storm of real difficulties at these campuses. We have to understand that the members of UUP continue to do the work of educating our students and training the next generation of those who are going to be so important in our economy, while also taking care of patients at the SUNY hospitals in the depths of the worst of the COVID crisis. Meanwhile, the public funding wasn't there. This is a public university system. It needs public funding. You get the resources there, students will come and students will succeed. It's an absolute fact, and it will happen, but we need the resources.
The governor's talked about making things easier for those who work within the healthcare industry here in New York State, talking about a lot of different programs to make that happen, to make nurses want to stay here. The system has 3 teaching hospitals. What can the governor do? What can SUNY do with those hospitals to ensure that we retain the best and the brightest when it comes to the healthcare industry?
You know, and again, I'm overwhelming you with numbers here, but some of them are just striking. Once again, if you go back to the 2008 figures, over $1 billion has been lost in terms of public funding for the SUNY teaching hospitals. The reality is, you take any institution and you eliminate that much support financially, the institutions are going to suffer. At the same time, when you look back at the case of COVID, Governor Cuomo declared downstate in central Brooklyn as a COVID-only hospital. That meant it could not treat any other patients. It could not take care of any other patients, thereby generating revenue in that way. They could only treat those who were down with COVID, which is an important role for a public state hospital. And they did their jobs amazingly well, even though they were short of resources, and for that matter, personal protective equipment. But coming out of that crisis, the resources are desperately needed so they can care for patients and at the same time take care of the training and education of nurses, of primary care physicians, of medical technicians, all of those professions that are needed. We need the resources. SUNY has proposed a significant increase in mission funding for those hospitals, $175 million. We agree with them wholeheartedly. That needs to happen, and in this year's budget.
Now, you and quite a few of your members were here in Albany at the Capitol recently, talking with some lawmakers, doing some lobbying. Did you like what you heard, or do you feel your thoughts and your ideas here are being received well from lawmakers here in Albany?
Yeah, very much so. I want to start with the governor. The relationship that we have with the governor and her staff is really very good. They are open to our ideas. We have good conversations. They respect that we as a union, first and foremost, want to ensure that the work we do is supported by the state, by the public sector, because that's what we are. We are public employees. But at the same time, what we are trying to do together in our 41,000 members is to make the state a better place to live and work. Having said that, we also have an incredibly good relationship with the legislature. They know our issues. They understand that when we are calling for a significant increase in funding, it will benefit upstate communities that are in desperate need of economic growth and development. And SUNY can be the direct line for the kind of economic development and income growth that upstate communities, from small towns like where I live in Cobleskill to bigger cities like Syracuse and Rochester and Buffalo.
Right, and I believe you've said too in some of your past statements, the last thing you want to see these schools do is to fall back on any sort of tuition increase, because as we know, this system has long been a really affordable way for people and students here across New York to get the higher ed at a really reasonable rate when compared to other private institutions around the country.
Yeah, and it's very true. And I think, look, I understand why campus presidents are desperate for financial support and resources, and that's where the idea has surfaced about a tuition increase as proposed by the governor. We don't think that's the way to go. We think that a public university system needs public financing that has really been so limited over the past 15 years. We need to get back to having that public funding because students have been carrying the burden for 10 years now. At the same time of tuition increases, which have been flat for the last couple of years, I grant you that, but fees have continuously risen, and the cost of room and board and the meal plans. I mean, that's why there is this proposal and this development of food pantries on campuses. It's because students can't afford the meal plans. That's unacceptable. Costs need to be brought under control for students, and the way to do that is with public funding, and that's what we're calling for. And we think we've got the support in the legislature.
Right.
And I think at the end of the day, the governor's going to be there too.
And still a ways to go until that April 1st budget deadline, so we'll see what happens. Fred Kowal, President of United University Professions. Fred, as always, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Environmental advocates are pushing lawmakers to pass a bill meant to reduce waste. But not everyone is on board. We'll break down the concerns some have about that proposal. Remember, you get a comment, story idea, we would love to hear from you. Email EmpireStateWeekly@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. You can soon see some changes when purchasing your favorite beverage. Advocates are looking to expand the state's bottle bill. They say it'll help the environment, but not everybody agrees. Capitol correspondent Amel Talegi has some details.
Right now, bottle deposit fees are 5 cents per bottle in New York State. Under the proposal, that would change to 10 cents and include all carbonated and non-carbonated drinks. Ryan Thorson Carson, campaign coordinator for NYPIRG's environmental campaign, says in 2021, the bottle deposit return rate was at 71%.
But if you look at states like Michigan, Oregon, states that have a 10-cent deposit, they're consistently in the high 80s, low 90s for bottle return rate.
Ken Pekulski, VP of Government Affairs for the Business Council of New York State, says this is just another way for the state to generate revenues. He also says the state isn't utilizing current programs to the best of their ability.
People sit back and say, we wonder why these programs aren't working well. Well, we've sort of abandoned them. And instead of making the ones we have work better, or work the way they were intended to, we're off writing a wholly different piece of legislation.
But Carson says some of those systems are broken.
Part of the problem with curbside recycling, when it actually goes into the bale, I think it's 94% of New York waste systems are single stream devices. Single stream devices put everything in the same stream, right? And so when glass breaks, for example, and the bottle bill expansion really is about glass, when that glass breaks, it renders everything around it unrecyclable.
Carson says the main goal is to move glass out of municipal recycling systems. Reporting in Albany, Amel Talegi.
All right, thanks to Amel. Governor Hochul has issued an executive order for paid parental leave. The program will provide 12 weeks of full paid leave for state employees, but not all are included. Amel's got more on that now.
Those eligible are non-union state employees. Governor Hochul says this will help 10,000 New Yorkers bond with their newborn, fostered, or adopted child. In a statement, she said in part, quote, "The dedicated New Yorkers who keep our state moving should not be forced to choose between a paycheck and caring for their child. It's not only good for their families, it's good policy. To qualify for PPL, you have to be a full-time employee or work at least 50% part-time. Parental leave is available for use once every 12 months and must be used within 7 months of birth or adoption." The Department of Civil Service says this covers a broad range of employees, including managers, middle managers, and specialists in fields like education, law, computer science, medicine, and more. The governor's office says they're looking to extend this benefit to more than 170,000 additional employees. According to the National Partnership for Women and Families, without a national paid leave policy and the rising cost of living, states across the U.S. are taking it upon themselves to find a solution. They also pointed to studies that show mothers who receive paid leave to care for their child are more likely to return to their job. I'm told the policy is now in effect, but when I asked the governor's office and the Department of Civil Service how people could apply, I did not get a response. Reporting in Albany, Amel Talegi.
New York disability advocates are calling on lawmakers to increase the cost of living adjustment for nonprofit organizations that help people with intellectual and learning disabilities. Current budget proposal would include a 2.5% increase, but advocates say an increase of 8.5% is what's needed in order to retain and recruit more people.
We need a lot of volunteering and a lot of staff to work in our houses. I know it's short nowadays today, and we just need a lot of help.
They depend on staff to do everything from eating, bathing, getting up in the morning, getting out of bed, getting to work. They aren't able to do it on their own. A freshman congressman gets a one-on-one chat with President Biden. What he chose to bring up during their talk. That's coming up. Remember, if you get a comment, story idea, let us know. Always email EmpireStateWeekly@gmail or find us on Twitter.
Finally, from us here on Empire State Weekly, at the State of the Union last week, after President Biden presented his legislative goals to a rowdy, sometimes combative Republican Congress, Representative Mark Molinaro made an overture to the president during a brief one-on-one the two shared. Here's Molinaro explaining their exchange.
I told the president there were places where Republicans and Democrats could work together. I was raised by a single mom who grew up with undiagnosed depression. I grew up on food stamps, and I said to the president on issues related to mental health and the need to confront mental wellness nationwide, he'll have partners if he's willing to work together. And his response was similar to what he said in his speech. The president said, some of my Democratic friends get mad at me, but I want to work together on these issues. And so I'll take him at his word, and we're going to continue to push forward on the issues where I think we can have find some common ground.
For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. We'll see you right back here next week. Don't forget, here's a full list of where you can catch Empire State Weekly all over the state on 10 television stations across New York.